Hello again. This is Erin Dragonsong with wiccaspirituality.com and the Elevation email list that I've mentioned several times if you've been listening. And I think this is video number 5, and I wanted to talk to you about what has happened so far. Sort of like, here's where we are today. Here's the snapshot. But in order for you to understand how far we've come, I actually need to give you a little bit of background. So in the 1980s, I was a young adult, and I woke up very quickly thanks to trauma in my life. But see, in the 1980s, it was a very different world. If you haven't lived through it, or you weren't conscious back then of what was going on energetically or evolutionarily, it was very, very materialistic. People, things we talk about nowadays were not discussed back then. In fact, even there, it seems like there's this period of time where it did not impinge on the cultural consciousness, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's there. Everybody's talking about it. I really noticed this in the year 2000. 2000? Yeah, I think it was 2000, when climate change was not talked about. It was only the very fringe groups who would even mention that. Most people didn't know what the term even meant. And then around the year 2000, like there was a moment almost at the beginning of 2000, it just went click and it flipped over, and suddenly everybody was talking about it. They may not have agreed with it. There may be, dispute about what's causing it or anything, but suddenly the concept was part of the zeitgeist, the consciousness of society. And that's happened with a lot of things. It's happened with, say, the law of attraction. The law of attraction 30 years ago, 50 years ago, it was the realm of fantasy, witchcraft. Oh, Mary Morrissey tells a story of going to try to find, I think it was the book As a Man Thinketh. And she couldn't find it anywhere. She ended up in this huge bookstore, Powell's bookstore, and asked for it. And they said, oh, yes, I think we do have that. It's in the section under witchcraft. Literally, how you think affecting who you are, affecting your life, was called witchcraft. Now, it's amazing how many sort of very grounded, earthy, materialistic, muggle type people, let's say, are completely familiar with the idea, even if they don't fully believe in it or know how it works, but they're familiar with the idea that how you think matters. Your thoughts matter. They affect things. Your thoughts affect things. That was the realm of wild fantasy in the 1980s. Okay. So this is the kind of shift that we've seen happen. It's massive. It's massive. Things that nobody would ever talk about, things that nobody believed in. Nobody used to talk about life after death. The very, very fringe group of people would talk about that. When I started in Wicca, it was not easy to find books on Wicca, and they were not very good. Most of them were really, really terrible, if you could find them. Now you can find, there are books on minuscule parts of Wicca, like, Beltane, how to celebrate Beltane. There's a whole book, I think, on how to celebrate Beltane. It's shifted so much and so fast that we can't even really see, unless you stop to look. You can't even really imagine how much we've changed. The world now is completely different. The world consciousness now is completely different than when I was 18. Completely different. We have already come a very great distance into energetic being, into spiritual being, from the materialism that we came from. Now, if you look around, if you're paying attention these days, You may very well see a lot of materialism still being promoted. It's out there in terms of, for instance, illness comes from outside of you, healing comes from outside of you. This is not true. And most of us by this time, most of you listening, I'm sure, have experienced that maybe not 100%, but you probably are aware that your attitudes, your experiences, your traumas, I mean, that's even mainstream. All of this is mainstream science now. It's just being overlooked, let's say. But your emotions cause illness, and your emotions can cause health. People are cured daily by changing their emotions, changing their thoughts, visualizing. There are spontaneous regressions. If you look it up in the Noetic Institute, there's a list there. There are spontaneous regressions of virtually every disease imaginable that cannot be explained by science, certain science, Western science. So materialism is still running things. We still tend to think of the body as a machine, even though we know that's 100 years out of date, even though we know better. The paradigm continues, the materialistic paradigm that says, oh, if my heart fails, I can just take out one heart, put in another heart. They're completely interchangeable. And we can do that. But what we're also learning is that a lot of the person comes along with that heart. A lot of that person comes along with that kidney. We are changed by taking in pieces of other people, not necessarily in a bad way. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm just saying we're not clockwork organisms. And this is not a random clockwork universe. Quantum physics has demonstrated, it's the science that is the most proven by far of any scientific principle that we've ever come up with. Quantum physics is the basis of our phones, of our communication, of our computers, all of it. None of this would work without quantum physics. And yet we still, there's still that idea that, oh, material world happens to us. We're not creating it. But that is changing. You can see for yourself, just look around at how much that's changing, how much people are talking about energy now. I really liked that Cesar Millan, the dog whisperer, he brought to cultural consciousness in a whole new way about energy and how energy impacts things around you, like, say, your dog. If you look for it, there's all of these ways, all of these people who've been bringing forward pieces of this for decades now. And we're really seeing that come to fruition now in this moment of time where we're stepping through the threshold to the new spiritual golden age. It may not look like it yet, but it's a big threshold, from one age to another, from like 25,000 years to the next 25,000 year cycle. You can guess that the overlap is going to take a little bit, right? We have been in the overlap for a long time. In the 60s, we saw it coming. Those lovely hippies, they gave us the warning that it was coming. And we've been seeing it more and more and more since, especially 2012, things really shifted. But it's been a gradual progression. It will be a progression, but the speed is gaining day by day, faster and faster and faster. So that's sort of the picture of where we've been and where we are now. Okay, we have come a huge distance in shifting our mindset from the materialistic, mechanistic belief system of perhaps your parents or my youth, depending on what age group you are in. We've shifted much more into quantum physics type thinking, into matrix type thinking. And we will, so let's see, in the next video, we will look at let's say 2022. What is 2022 going to be about? Because right now, I think we all really want to know that. And oh my gosh, we so need that perspective and hope right? Who isn't feeling the burnout of the just, even if you haven't had massive shifts in your life